So if we're by ourselves, what do I need from me? I think if we're working as a team, could we then also plan in terms of that training plan what you can do to help out? So if it's about linking roles of what we're doing, but also co-complementing of co-coaching. So what are we working together? So if we're working in the small side of game, Chris, you might be working on in possession, I'll be looking at out of possession, and we can help complement each other.
Good afternoon, welcome to Coaching Cards. My name's John Williams. This is Claire and Chris. We're here to see how coaches can plan for training.
What should be in the training plan? It's a hard one sometimes, but what do you think are the key core things we need in there, John?
I think you need to understand the environment you're going to be working in. I think that's a major plus for people, that if they understand where the environment is, size of area they've got, how many players they've got, what's the equipment, and also I think the step principle is really important for what they need to understand.
Can you explain a bit more about the step principle?
Yes, it's about the space, what basically you've got, and whether it's wants to go bigger or smaller, depending what you want to get out of this session. The task, what actually you want from the session, and then the equipment, what do you need to plan and bring to the practice, and then people, how many people have you got in the practice, and how can you deal with people that's coming late? Have you got an arrival activity what actually compensates people coming late and players coming late and whatever?
Anything to add to that, Chris?
Yeah, probably just how can we embed into the training plan around player challenges, around probably team challenges? How do we link them from training to match day? How do we spend a bit of time maybe working on those across a number of weeks to allow repetition and get that probably frequency of learning for the players to be able to position where they can practice, have loads of goals and loads of attempts at trying to improve around a specific area that may be aligned to the four corners.
Yeah, and I think being related to both in terms of what you're saying, in terms of it's about us and our planning. So if we're by ourselves, what do I need from me? I think if we're working as a team, could we then also plan in terms of that training plan what you can do to help out? So if it's about linking roles of what we're doing, but also co-complementing of co-coaching. So what are we working together? So if we're working in the small side of game, Chris, you might be working on in possession, I'll be looking at out of possession, and we can help complement each other. If I'm lucky in the talent pathway, I might have some other physical performance staff. Where do they link into? What can they look at with some eyes, or other coaching staff as well? So I think training in terms of our planning needs is about our roles and responsibilities. I think that's quite key.
What's the most important thing for a coach to remember when they start planning for training?
I think probably we've got to start to think about two things for me. One, the session's about the players and where they're at in their development needs. So what do individuals need? What do units need? What does the team need? How does that then link to probably some key areas for their development at this particular time? And then I also think it's about probably giving them a real opportunity to practice things, have a high level of repetition. I always think a good question for coaches to think about is how can we get our players doing more things more often so that they might need to work on. So for me, I think that's probably always a starting point for me around frequency, repetition, ball rolling time, and having a real good frequency of probably opportunities for them to develop and practice.
I think a good practice thing is like, would I want to do this session I'm planning? I think it's always a bit of a compliment, isn't it? If it's enjoyable, there's still those main elements of part of what a good session is. It's enjoyable. Yes, we might have a bit of some of it is hard work, and we have to accept it, and there's other bits that we might not enjoy. But the fundamental main part, because if I'm working in area, you want to come back and you want to deliver the session as well. So I think first and foremost, sometimes we have to go, would I want to be in it? And actually, am I going to enjoy delivering the session as well? One of the simplicities of planning.
When we had, through the academy structure, you have part-time coaches who obviously have got employment in the daytime. And what I try to do is get the practices what they actually enjoy doing, not necessarily the players, but the coaches enjoy doing, but around the structure of in and out, in possession, out of possession, transition, whichever week that actually fell into. So the coaches had a library of sessions what actually met them areas. Yeah. For example, someone who works works well 5 o'clock at night and they have to get to training for 5:45, they can't really start planning in-depth practices. So we helped them design their own practices, which actually met the 3 areas of the game.
What are your top 3 training planning tips for coaches?
My own personal one is plan for plan B. So my plan A will be the one what I write out, but understand that this will change, i.e. numbers, equipment, weather, areas, and it all goes back down to that will be my plan A, but I have to understand that I might have to live a plan B.
So when we're learning as coaches, isn't it, do you think we can create that unplanning or create that where we just have to experience it? Similar to we say what do players need to experience as coaches ourselves, we probably need to experience where we turn up late, we forgot the bibs, we haven't got the footballs maybe, or we're waiting on a number of players. Do you think there's ways we can plan that in, or do they naturally just kind of
I think that's a bit of experience. You can. I had that last night, where players came late. We have to sometimes accept that, but I think you're right. It's the continuing environment changes for you as a coach, and the experiences you get will actually get you better at dealing with plan B.
Yeah, I think my 3 tips to consideration for planning would be 1, we've got to differentiate, so we've got to provide every player entry to the session. And then I think secondly for me would be objective focus, so have we got real clarity around what we want players to learn and what we want them to do. And then third for me would be to probably make sure that we're directional in our practices. So how can we align everything that we do to essentially what football is? There's an invasion game, so how can we have moments of attack and defence and transition within that? And ultimately for me that starts with directional practice. Next question. How would you look to include game insights to support your planning?
I think they're really valuable. My experiences around talent pathways, not necessarily about the game now, but where the game's going to go. So sometimes we need game insights, actually where we're going to look at our planning, what tools do we need to give players to be ready for the game in 5 to 10 years' time. 10 years ago, did we know goalkeepers are going to be massive in terms of distribution? Because generally they're distributors that can handle the ball, in essence. So they're a really big, strong, valuable part of the game. For example, in terms of, you can look at around that practice design element. So if I know that 1 in 8 shots currently from game insights are happening in the game, well, I'm only going to give players 8 shots, because then why do I give them a bag of 20? Yes, go practice and motor skill learn and pick up all those other elements, but match stress and match environment, I'm not going to ask you to concentrate and go, you're only going to get 8 goals. And that will maybe help some match day practice as well. So how do we get them from planning to a practice session to make it relevant and realistic to the game that's there in front of them? But if we didn't have the game insights, and that can be picked up even just from watching your own game, but that's the top end of the game. But we don't know that because we're data informed, and that will help us put that together.
Yeah, I try to use as an example the spectrum, and when we discuss with coaches is where their practice fits on the spectrum towards the game, and how sometimes you actually trade areas off. So, i.e. the technical side. So if you're working on technical information with the players, it would be low from the game, and how you can build that up and get the coaches to actually start looking at where they put this into their sessions and where the sessions start. So you could start with i.e. whole, when we used to do it, whole part whole. If you do a whole, it's near the game, but the part might come down, but it's for a reason. And if you've got a rationale why you're doing it at this level, then that's fine. But you must have a rationale why it's not near the game, but this practice, what you're doing, example, is near the game. Like a multi-directional practice is not near the game because it's not the game, but it's not low level, it's still competitive, so it could be somewhere in between. But as long as you as a coach understand that, I think we're going down the right track.
Yeah, and I think when we're working with coaches, we're really fortunate here that we've got a fantastic game insights team at the FA where we can direct to try and understand returns of practice and what that looks like in the game format that they play.
Yeah.
So, you know, also around the domain that they might be working in, whether it's disability or it's the female game or ultimately working the male 11-a-side game as an example. You know, how can we interrogate data that we collate to help inform what we do? And then I think sometimes it's about understanding the trade-offs and the benefits of, you know, maybe providing different strategies, if you like, to provide some, you know, useful tips for them to work within, you know, the game format they're currently working in.
Yeah, well, there's a good example, like last night, for example, if you look at finishing. So I'll keep on that theme for a little bit. So they've seen the goals. If there's a lot of goals scoring from, so for example, there's Georgie Sandway, I'm going to score outside the box. But my insights are telling me that, well, I'm going to, if I have more shots inside the box, I'm going to score. But you're still scoring outside the box. So what data is and what it isn't as well. She missed another 4 chances afterwards, but you're still kind of being, what is data, what it isn't. And there's about making sure that it's there to complement your sessions that are going on, not to necessarily work off and just stick to it as well. So it's still complementation in terms of what we're looking at, the players we have in front of us, the skill sets that they have, the reasons why they're there, and the skill sets you have to kind of pick up on that as well and observing it.
Next question. What session structures are there for coaches to use? Claire, we'll come to you first.
I've seen quite often used in helping, and we mentioned before about space and areas, carousel styles. So it gives them a bit of a chance to work around. If, for example, we're trying to develop a player, we want some certain tool sets that they need to have. Well, we've actually got coaches that we can work. So the player will actually be exposed to each session and what they'll be looking at. So we know definitely there's a need that the player, it's not necessarily what they want, but it's the need for them to kind of cover it. Also in regards to carousels, it's a bit easier to set up as well. So you can either take on and take off, and then it's already there set up for them to use. Trade-off being wise, it can be quite complicated to maybe plan and to organise it first and foremost, but the actual delivery point might be a little bit easier to kind of sort itself out. But if you've got co-coaches around you, you can probably complement that.
You look at the whole pothole situation where we've been on the Advanced Youth Award, or the Youth Awards as they came through, and the whole pothole was a major area. What we did, that sometimes puts some coaches out their comfort zone a little bit, knowing because we used to technique, skill, game. Well, actually now we're going to start with a game, and we could finish with a game. And in between that game, you're doing some technical or unit stuff with the players, which is a little bit out of the comfort zone. But once what the coaches need to think about is just try it. And it's not new. It's just that something we've brought into the football coaching world, and people when they do it actually just buy into it. It's really beneficial. It's good for the parents to see as well. So involve the parents while we're doing whole part all, and we're starting with a game, and we're not doing technique, skill, game like we've all traditionally done. Where we're going to how would it be for the parents or the kids to go, I'll tell you what, let's start with a game. And let's see what happens in the game, what actually might influence my part section of that, because we're going to go back into the game later on.
Yeah, and I think it's important for coaches to think about the up the steps model as well. So ultimately, probably what we do is we start simple and then we evolve and we build and we keep developing and extending the session. I think the trade-off part is really important though, for us to understand what's the start point and the challenge point for our players. Do we need to start easy and simple, or actually can they start higher up the pathway? So, you know, if we're moving up the steps, there might be an opportunity for them to maybe not spend the first 15 minutes getting to a point where they actually need that level of challenge. That start point might be a little bit higher. So for the coaches to try and understand about, you know, whereabouts on these steps do we need to start the session, where can we extend it? Also being really comfortable to start it a bit higher up where there's a bit more of a specific challenge, or it's a little bit more of a harder task, or it's a bit more fast in terms of the tempo, but always can work back from there if we need to. But we don't know sometimes unless we provide the stretch to the players, maybe you know, working a bit higher up that up the steps pathway.
Do you think the whole part whole system actually helps that? Where if you had a game before, it might tell you where the players are, where you can start your practice.
Yeah.
And you don't have to start it at foundation level.
Yeah, and I think
you might start it if you were laying bricks, you wouldn't start it at foundation level. You might start it on the 3rd course or something like that.
Yeah, and I think if we use the session structure around whole part whole, what we might do is we might align receiving as a theme for that, and we might spend the first 10 or so minutes observing the players within the game in the whole section around receiving. You know, where are they at? What areas do they need to work on? What am I noticing? What are some of the trends that I'm seeing from the players in terms of where I might then design the part session. So I might break out into smaller units. I might start to do quite a level of high repetition. Might start to look at receiving strategies for, you know, 0 touch turns, 1 touch turns, opposed or unopposed work, playing through against cones, playing through against mannequins, just to get high level of repetition. And then ultimately you might align that back into the whole at the end to say, right, where's the improvement been? We're putting it back into the practice. You know, what's the ability for people to receive to then try and play forward? So I think the whole part whole method, when we align it to a theme and we start to see that flow through, is really important for us as coaches to observe, you know, player development and little trends and progressions that we see from them.
I think learning's instant as well, because we mentioned there about sometimes the practices haven't been designed. That design doesn't have to come from us. We can give that ownership to players to do that, and because it's so relevant and it's then and there, their reflections and feedback are instant, and it's not. Do you remember when we did this in the game 2 days ago? Because sometimes getting kids to remember and players to remember of all ages, you know, what they did yesterday, never mind, it might be 2-3 days that you might touch point again. So playing the game then and there and observing and using your lens and saying, okay, we're going to improve, so get about receiving. Well, actually, you might want to work on another element of scanning. You might want another element of your movement to receive in central areas out wide. So actually at points, if it's then and there, then they might be able to adjust it. You're there, it's just facilitating. Not just facilitating, because it's still a key role, but the ownership comes to the players and they buy into it more because it's their session.
How can coaches plan to tailor a training session to meet the needs of individuals?
I think going back to what Claire's said a few times is you need to know who the players are. So the coaches need to know what the player, what kind of player he is, what kind of person they are, what their skills are, what their skill set is, and I think you need to plan around that if you're going to do individual stuff as well. So part of the bigger practice, if you're co-coaching as well, is to highlight individual work sometimes within the practice, so it doesn't have to all stop. So you know who the player is, you've got the idea of what their skill set's going to be, and it can continue within the practice. But say I'm working with you, Claire, you could take one player individually to do something individual, but you've got to know who they are. I think you've got to dig deep into knowing the players.
I think the key is knowing why they're there as well. So again, from the different facets of where they are, talent pathway, they might still, look, I want to play for a club. You know, I want to be a professional, I want to be in an England pathway. So you've got to have an understanding of why they're there. Then that's that honesty, reflections, connection. So using your IDPs, if it's a review, if it's a formulating some goal setting within there, how are you going to look at achieving it? And again, being realistic about their development phase. You know, if you're talking to an 8-year-old, it's a very different conversation to a 15, to a 16-year-old, to a 12, to a senior football player as well. You know, the honesty and reflections that we use to, with that in mind is really important.
Yeah, and I think to meet needs of the players, I also think sometimes we've got to explain the why. So, you know, why are we doing this practice? Why is it going to benefit me? How is it going to help me? How can we get into a situation where we can provide detail within our training sessions so that the players are clear in no uncertain terms about why they're doing that practice? And I think that's really important sometimes about meeting individual needs. So I know how this practice is going to help me, not only as an individual, but how it's going to connect me within a unit, how it's going to help the whole team, what's the role I might play within our team strategy. Yeah. So for me, it's about building on the points we've talked about, understand the who in front of us, needs, wants, motivations, where are that in the development journey. But I also think for me about meeting needs is definitely explaining the why of the practice. I think it's really important that players are clear in terms of why they're doing what they're doing.
Do you have any top tips to help coaches plan for training when they really haven't got much time to do it?
Yeah, so I think probably the biggest tip I might give them straight away is that, you know, ultimately if you're running short of time and you're driving to your training session and you've not got much preparation time when you get to the venue, you've got your balls, your bibs, your cones to sort out, and the players are already arriving. I think the first thing I would say is, can we put some training sessions on that look like the game? That's the first tip I'd give them. I would also go small numbering work. So if I'm working with a group of, you know, in grassroots, for example, it might be that we've got lots of opportunities to work on a theme tonight, so a core skill, so it could be receiving, it could be turning, it could be passing. But what does that look like in a 3v3 format? You know, how do we give a high number of repetitions, for example? If we want to work on moving with the ball, 3v3 is not a bad little place to start from, because they're going to get loads of opportunities to be in situations where they can move with the ball. There's you know, a high number of frequencies of touches on the ball that they're going to have, but it's game-like, it's directional in its nature, and ultimately, if we are short of time, that game focus is, for me, really important rather than cues or standing or waiting.
I think if it's the actual setting up time that is limited, you know, an arrival's easy to start up. So having something that will link in theme for allowing you to then set up what you might need to do. So if it's, you know, 1v1 work, but you might be saying, well, actually, we're going to focus on a bit here about in wide areas. So you drip them in, or it might be like, oh, do you remember seeing this game last night or the weekend? We're going to do X, Y, and Z. So it's getting them on to do something why you might need to set up. I would probably hope and think that coaches have an idea of their planning already in terms of an overview. But I think we've all been there when there's a session on before us. We've got literally 5 minutes to turn it around, if that, to kind of put the sessions on. So I've always found arrivals really good ideas to kind of just set little bits up. If it's a rondo plus, if it's, you know, so there's some transition work in there as well. So they're winning it and they're not just kicking it out, but they're winning it to go into a dribble zone or an end goal. Just even little things like that to kind of motivate players. And also sometimes, again, I'll go back to giving them some ownership. Like, let them set up 15 minutes of their own IDPs. If they've got stuff that they need to work on, give them 50 minutes of time to go and have them ready and say, look, I'm tight today, to kind of get there. You set up what you're going to set up, and I will then set up the session plan around it. If it's going to be a dribbling theme, they might be practicing their dribbling. If it's a passing, it might be a practice their passing. Again, it's within your constraints of the area that you're working in. So it's, yeah, we've got to be creative at times.
I think it's important as well, like if I'm in academy football, for example, and I'm working in the boys game, it's quite easy sometimes when I've got 7 or 8 players at training just to put them into a little small-sided game. But actually I might use that time to build with those 7 players around, you know, individual development plans. So I might create practices that are going to support them aligned to the players that I've got available. Yeah. So how can we use the time wisely and efficiently? So I think context is a good example. So we've talked about the grassroots example where I might be working with the under-6 girls programme and I've arrived and I've not got much time and I've just left my job and I've been racing to get to training, and, you know, game-like, directional in its nature, loads of opportunities to have a go. But the boys example there of working in the boys academy system, I've got 7 players, you know, let's try and work on some individual development plan work that's going to help them, but it's going to be really productive for that session rather than maybe just a game.
And I think we talked about it earlier as well, isn't it, is developing your own skill set to be adaptable to that. So not always having control. So not always saying that I must have 10 players or I must have even, or I must, like, putting yourself in the circumstances that you're just going to have those experiences, and then you reflect on yourself. So it's, you know, what skill sets do you need as a coach? Well, actually, them unplanned or short planning or them little stumbles are needed for you as well to kind of develop as a person, as a coach as well.
Yeah, I think the coaches need that, like you said before, Claire, they need that experience of sometimes the pitch is not available. So you start your session at 7 o'clock, there's someone else already on the practice area. So you can't really start your session till 10 past 7. But then you've got to be off for 8 o'clock because someone else is coming on. We've all been there. So how do you practice? And I think the arrival activity is really important. If you understand how powerful the arrival activity is, you might actually just get over this stumbling block that coaches, grassroots coaches, part-time coaches, all have other employment which which is really important to them, but important to the kids and the coaching session, and for their responsibility in that, the arrival activity, what we start to do now is powerful, really.
Yeah, and I think if you've, with the arrival activity as well, I think one of the top tips you might have is I'm limited for time, but the arrival activity that I'm going to set up is ultimately aligned to the theme that I want to work on.
Yes.
So that then we can make connections between the arrival activity. I will get to where I'm going to in the session and I'm evolving that, but I'm making that arrival activity intended outcome focused, and I'm getting them a chance to start, working on movements or working on specific actions of that outcome. So it's a good chance to start to say, right, well, actually, is a really adaptable, a really simple arrival activity that I know I can evolve, that can have multiple numbers, that I can get them working on things early, and then by the time everybody's arrived and we've given but they've been working on the focus. They've been working on that focus, and we can build from there.
And there's arrival activities what have got multiple outcomes. So you quite rightly said, if the players understand arrival activity and they enjoy doing it, but has multiple outcomes, you can actually just set them to. They could set that up themselves, couldn't they? While you set your practice up, because part time, when coaches haven't got much time, and if you ask coaches, and you ask them what's their major issue, it's time. Like you said, you've got a bag of balls, cones, he's forgot bibs, or whatever has happened, it's always to do with time.
What advice do you have to help coaches plan for training when working in different areas of the game? So I think consideration here would to be helped to start to think about 5 to 11s, 12 to 16s, 17 to 21s, adults game, disability game, a few little options here for us to think about.
Well, to me, the foundation side, they just need to have fun and enjoyment. And if you plan around the 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old, I'm just thinking about my grandkids. Do they want to have fun, enjoyment? And do you want them to come back next week? And you mentioned that. Do you want them to come back next week? Well, that's major part for them to learn. If you can put little bits of learning in them to keep them involved in this game, I think we might have got some kind of plan together to move them on a little bit. But I think the major thing for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, they've got to enjoy it and have fun.
I think effective coaching in, you could say female game, but all games is around fun, because you've got to enjoy it yourself as well. So I think there's that scope to it. But I think specifically in terms of the players, and we go back to people in front of us now, it's like knowing that you care, and knowing that you take time to know about them, and because they might be going through an exam period, they might be going through certain bits that are happening outside of the football environment that might be then impacting on you as well. So I think just to get to know them, kind of a little bit of my theme today, but also fundamentally from our bit is that connection and building the relationship is really important in terms of the coaching and about us and how we go on, because how I know I'm going to motivate you is going to be really key in terms of where I'm going to put into the practice of what I'm doing. Because if I know that you are motivated by me giving you praise, for example, and really encouragement about effort and not necessarily the outcome, because we're working on the outcome, because you might not be able to complete that technique all the time, but I'm praising your effort and you're trying to do it, and now I'm putting you up against another player, and we're going to start to, again, we mentioned about learning and development and moving on with it, but actually I know it might not be a success, but I've got to create that environment that you are comfortable to have a goal and make the mistakes, but then learn from it the next time as we look at it.
It's interesting, as we speak about all different parts of the cycle, is when they go to senior football, what makes people happy then?
Probably a variety of reasons, really, isn't there, in terms of probably what people would want, but ultimately, I think if we get to senior football, it'd be characteristics, capabilities of players. How do I suit into the team strategy? How do I view the game? What opportunities am I going to have to have a level of competition that meets my needs, my wants? Where I'm at in the learning. So I think it's probably a variety of reasons that would inform probably where they play.
Winning players
how
are
would
happy
that be
players.
with- How would that be in the women's game?
We all still want to win, fundamentally, but I think the key bit around culture and how we build it and that bit is how we win. But there is an element of when it's results orientated, the hard work becomes prior to that. So the development and learning opportunities and experiences. Are we giving players experiences where actually, do you know what, their wants and needs are slightly different, but what I'm having in front of me, because when you become a senior player, you're going to need this experience. So, but that goes back again about explaining the why. Do we know what the game's going to be in 5-10 years' time? Not necessarily, but we're trying to build some insights to try to get it. But if I'm going to give you for example, you might change position, because where do you might end up playing? So your first experience is probably not going to be in the position that you like to have, or you're going to be, unless you're a goalkeeper. That's the only position that pretty much, and we look at the England players currently now and in the past, both male and females have played varied of positions. So actually exposing them to different tools of what they're going to need may find where they're going to be in the future in their club football.
Yeah, and I think if you take an 11v11 example as well, like, it's probably a really important point for us to think about what the capabilities are of players. So, what can they do? What can't they do at the moment, and how am I going to help them? And then ultimately those capabilities might shape around, how we play. So ultimately, what's our principles, if you like, in terms of what's our model of the game? How do we play aligned to our player capabilities? So what does that then do to inform our strategy? What does that inform in terms of the system of play that we might be going to put into plan for the course of the season? And then ultimately, what are some of those capabilities, and how does it align to the individual tactics that we might deploy within that team strategy that we have? So I think sometimes it's really important that, the 11v11 example there around player capabilities, and how do they inform, ultimately how we view the game and what's right for our team.